as standard. I would just kindly request that everyone, if you have any questions, please utilize the chat function, and we will endeavour to answer as many questions as possible at the end of the webinar. And I should note as well that the recording of the webinar and the slides will be available throughout the on our InterTrade Ireland social media in the next coming days, and will be shared with everyone who's attended accordingly. So explain a bit of background for some of you who maybe haven't been on one of our trade series webinars before. InterTrade Ireland, we are basically a cross-border body established out of the Belfast Good Friday Agreement, and our aim is fundamentally to help businesses trade between Northern Ireland and Ireland in both directions. So that is looking at growing cross-border exports, helping develop collaborative innovation, and supporting areas such as clusters and networks. Can we have the next slide there, please, Jonathan? Yep. So just to explain a bit of background, some of our supports that you can avail of having attended this webinar today. So particularly as this is a customs focused webinar, I want to draw your attention to our InterTrade Ireland Trade Hub. You may or may not have heard of the Trade Hub before, but basically we offer through this it's an online knowledge base with easy to understand digital content in a large range of customs areas. Which these articles are free to use. And again, we have a very extensive list, particularly around this whole area of the Windsor Framework, Northern Ireland Protocol, which provides some really interesting practical advice to help you in your business. In addition to this, the content and also the webinars, we also offer fully funded one-to-one consultancy advice. This can be in the form of a short telephone conversation. If you've, say, got a quick query, I need a commodity code for X product, this can be an ideal service. Additionally, we also offer a trade health check, which involves 3 days of fully funded one-to-one support with a consultant of your choice to do a real deep dive into your in the customs, VAT, regulation or employment, looking at your processes, making sure you're fully compliant, trying to streamline where things can be streamlined, trying to minimize cost pressures. These are again extremely popular programs, and I highly recommend that you all following the webinar today consider availing of these to make sure you're fully up to speed with the upcoming changes that are going to take place in the coming weeks. Jonathan, can you on the next slide there, please? Okay, yep. So basically there are a few other supports. I just want to, whilst this is principally a customs focused webinar, I just want to bring your attention to. We also do a lot of supports. So if you're interested in selling cross border, we offer supports that provide sort of fully funded consultancy advice and also funding towards the cost of a salesperson to help you increase your sales in the cross-border market. Those programs would be our Trade Export Pathway and our Acumen programs. If you are interested in increasing your sales cross-border, we are in next month running 2 webinars on cross-border sales. Again, details of those will be included at the end of today's presentation. And also additionally, another one of our long-standing programs here at InterTrade Ireland is the Go to Tender program. So if you're interested in bidding for public contracts, we offer mentoring and online workshops helping you get up to speed with the world of tendering. Lastly, from me, I just want to make you aware of a brand new program we've got at InterTrade Ireland. We have now launched a supply chain sourcing specialist our service. So basically, if you're based in the food manufacturing engineering sector, we can partner you up with a sector specific specialist who will work with you to sort of review your current supply chain, identify any areas of risk or vulnerability, and offer sort of one-to-one bespoke mentoring and help to review your supply chain and identify new suppliers who may be able to further support your business. Again, this is a brand new program, but one we've already seen quite strong demand for. If you're having any difficulties with supply chain matters, please don't hesitate to get in touch. It does sometimes relate with customs, and we're more than happy to have a chat with you about that. Okay, so can we get the next slide there, please, Jonathan? So I know I wanted to take this opportunity to introduce Jonathan Walsh. Jonathan Walsh is one of our service providers here at InterTrade Ireland, and has a substantial level of expertise advising businesses on customs movements, particularly around Great Britain to Northern Ireland, the Northern Ireland Protocol, and the Windsor Framework. And he's going to take you through what are the key upcoming customs changes that are going to take place between now and and in the coming weeks and months ahead. And again, I just remind everyone, if you have any questions at any stage, please feel free to use the chat function, and we will endeavour to answer as many questions as we can today throughout the presentation. So I'm just going to hand you over to Jonathan now.
Thank you, Marcus. Hopefully everybody can hear me okay. And look, technology when it works is fantastic, but if you give me a choice between being in a room and speaking to everybody live and doing this online, I think I would always go for the live experience and the ability to interact. But we will give it a go. Thanks for taking time out of your Tuesday late morning, early afternoon to come along to this webinar on the upcoming changes in the Windsor Framework. Now, last week I was fortunate enough to be part of a delegation that was over in Westminster, meeting with MPs, ministers and officials alike to talk about these upcoming changes. And it was during one of those meetings with the new of the Northern Ireland Affairs Committee that Stuart Anderson from the Northern Ireland Chamber cited or referred to a percentage stat that was provided in a recent InterTrade Ireland survey quarterly review. And that kind of resonated with me, and it was that out of all the businesses surveyed for the end of Q2 2024 Business Monitor, All Island Business Monitor by InterTrade Ireland, 62% of those surveyed said they had no knowledge of the Windsor Framework. And then out of that, 26% who said that they remained impacted by Brexit, half of those said they had no knowledge of the Windsor Framework. Now, we take that into context of the fact that it's an all-island survey, and the Windsor Framework is ultimately a Northern Ireland agreement. It's with regards to that access provided to Northern Ireland, both to its internal United Kingdom market, but also access to the EU market for goods. And I thought that the best way to start this webinar and presentation today was to kind of go back to the beginning and to very, very briefly take a run through what's happened and some key dates and so forth, just to give it a bit of context for everybody listening in. So, back in June 2016, an absolute lifetime ago now, 8 years ago, the UK went to the polls and we had a referendum on the continued membership of the EU. And as a result of that referendum, the decision was surprisingly taken at the time, surprising to a lot of us, especially those of us involved in international trade at that time. The vote was made to leave the European Union. And then we had several years of negotiations and a period of time around Article 50 and trying to find solutions before we could actually come out the other side of it. So we had some key dates in there that some of us will remember. And as I say, these slides will be available, or as Marcus said, these slides will be available to you all in the coming days on the InterTrade Ireland website. So out of those dates, we had an agreement called the Northern Ireland Protocol, to give it its full name. And the purpose of this agreement was to prevent the requirement for a hard border on the island of Ireland. it was negotiated as part of the withdrawal agreement between the UK and the European
Sorry to
Union.
interrupt, Jonathan. Could you please reshare the slides? It's just we've got a couple people having some difficulty accessing the slides, if that's okay.
Okay, give me 2 seconds here. 1 second,
No
and
problem.
I'll
Thank you.
put them. Okay, and I'm going to now you see me, guys, and hopefully not for very long. I'll be able to get these back up for you. Sure. One slide. How's that, Marcus?
I can certainly see the slides. I think that should hopefully be it there now. If anyone else has any problems accessing the slides, please do message the chat function, and we'll do our best to help you out on that one.
Okay.
Okay.
To be honest, Marcus, the slides will be there in the background, but I'm hoping that I should be able to give a lot of the detail that people need, and they should be able to follow on anyway. But yeah, if there's an issue and I need to try and do it again. Okay, so just to recap, no problem. Just to recap, the Northern Ireland Protocol was negotiated as part of the withdrawal agreement. Its purpose was to prevent the requirement for a hard border on the island of Ireland between Northern Ireland and Ireland. It was negotiated, if we recall, we went through several British Prime Ministers at that time. It was negotiated and finally allowed for Article 50 to be passed, and for the UK to enter into that transition period. So just let me move on to the next one. There was 3 key areas, and this I want you to keep in mind as we go about the next hour and a half of this webinar today. There's 3 key areas that were negotiated within the Northern Ireland Protocol, or the NI Protocol for short. They were around customs arrangements, VAT, and political consent. Customs arrangements was covered under Article 4 and Article 5 of the Northern Ireland Protocol. Very short document, about 60 odd pages, if anybody ever wishes to have a read of it. Article 8 dealt with the VAT element of the protocol, and then we had the democratic consent element of it. This is where the Northern Ireland Assembly would have a vote either every 4 years or 8 years, depending on the outcome of the previous vote, with regards to our continued participation within this arrangement. So what did it effectively mean? The whole of the United Kingdom left the European Union at the end of the transition period in December 2020. So from the 1st of January 2021, the whole of the United Kingdom was out of the European Union, including Northern Ireland. However, due to the Northern Ireland Protocol, Articles 30 and 110 of the Treaty for the Function of the European Union continued to apply within Northern Ireland, in the UK in respect of Northern Ireland, which allowed for goods to move between between Northern Ireland and the EU, free of customs, tariff and non-tariff barriers. We have arrangements in place that meant that the flip side of that, how do you create that scenario where you can have the free movement of goods on the island of Ireland and ultimately to the whole of the EU? So instead of having border crossing points on the 250 to 350 different border crossings on the island of Ireland, you had instead goods moving from Great Britain to Northern Ireland treated as effectively imports, and the customs obligations, administrative burdens and requirements were transferred and flipped to that sea crossing element instead of on the island itself. And also we have, as I said, customs, VAT and regulatory alignment between Northern Ireland and the EU, which meant that there would be sanitary rules and veterinary checks. This is SPS rules, sanitary phytosanitary rules on agricultural products, marketing and quality standards, alignment with the EU on that. And in terms of customs, goods that were in free circulation within Northern Ireland were ultimately in free circulation in both the EU and the UK as well. So we have a quick overview of post-January 2021 trade under the Northern Ireland Protocol. Goods to and from Northern Ireland to the EU, including Ireland, were left largely unaffected. I had said unaffected, but I went back and I changed that to largely unaffected because, to be fair, awareness and knowledge of the Northern Ireland Protocol arrangements in continental Europe wouldn't have been as good as it would have been and should have been here on the island of Ireland. So there was sometimes problems with goods moving from Northern Ireland, from EU to Northern Ireland, as well as going the other way, because we were still sometimes considered as being the similar or the same as the rest of the United Kingdom. In terms of goods from NI to GB, mostly unaffected. There is unfettered access for Northern Ireland businesses to our internal UK market. That's the Great British market. And there's a small list, I think it's about 11 or 12 prohibited and restricted goods, torture goods, mercury goods, Atlantic toothfish, a couple of other products in there that there is a requirement for export controls on, but largely unaffected when moving from Northern Ireland to Great Britain. Goods going from GB to NI have seen the biggest change as a result of the Northern Ireland Protocol at this time, and that is the requirement for digital declarations, so customs administrative declarations and movements of goods from GB to NI, and sanitary phytosanitary checks on agricultural products coming from GB to NI. Northern Ireland, in terms of trading goods with the rest of the world, NI benefits from UK free trade agreements. With goods going out, we benefit. And in terms of goods coming in, we have not at risk and at risk. And if goods are at risk, EU third country tariffs apply. If they're not at risk, UK tariffs apply as per free trade agreements. But we can discuss that, and we will be discussing that further as we go along. Goods between GB and NI via Ireland using transit, and goods going from continental Europe to NI via GB land bridge would move via transit. That would be, instead of having to open an export declaration, close an import declaration, and then have an import declaration again when it gets into Northern Ireland, have movements happening that way. So they will move via transit. So there was some issues undoubtedly around the Northern Ireland Protocol. There was issues with a lot of bureaucracy being put on those companies that were effectively internal traders, buying from suppliers within GB, but only trading internally within the United Kingdom market. And in February last year, February 2023, we got the long-awaited announcement of a negotiation under the Windsor Framework to try and sort out some of the issues that had been found with the original Northern Ireland Protocol. And in terms of businesses, the key elements of the Windsor Framework and what it meant was there would be a dispensation for GB to NI movements of retail goods for end use and consumption in Northern Ireland under a Trusted Trader Scheme. This scheme is known as the Northern Ireland Retail Movement Scheme. This is what brought into place the not for EU labelling that you see on certain products on shelves in our supermarkets and shops here in Northern Ireland, and had been planned to be rolled out across the rest of the United Kingdom on the 1st of October this year, but we will look at that later on. And what that effectively meant was that products that were on the shelves in stores in Great Britain could also be sold in stores here in Northern Ireland. Before that arrangement, we had what was known as STAMNI. It was always meant to be a temporary arrangement, and that was to allow products such as chilled meats to continue to move from GB to NI, which would usually be prohibited from entering the EU single market from a third country, and equally would be prohibited, by the way, to enter the UK internal market from a third country because of the arrangements that were in place within those for protection, public health protection, and so forth. We learnt at that time about the new UK internal market scheme, which up until now has effectively replaced the UK trader scheme. And the UK trader scheme removed EU third country tariffs on goods that were not at risk of entering the EU single market. So the UK internal market scheme would go further. In addition to removing the associated tariffs on these not at risk goods, it would also mean that there would no longer be a requirement for those authorised and approved under this scheme moving not at risk goods to complete supplementary declarations on the movements from GB to NI. So if we are completing customs declarations using the Trader Support Service, we use what's known originally as the Custom Freight Simplified Procedures, now known as Simplified Customs Declaration Procedures. And we use those so that instead of having to provide all information up front, we complete a simplified frontier declaration, which is generated by the haulier completing an ENS, which is a safety and security declaration. And then we have until the 10th day of the month after the movement to complete the supplementary declaration, where we have to provide the bulk of information about the goods, the value, the weights, the commodity codes, the country of origin of the goods, and so forth. And we have to provide additional document codes dependent on those products and so forth. And again, we will talk about those as we go along. We had new requirements for fast parcel operators introduced, and we've had an 18-month window to put these in place. Back in 2021, from day one, we've had customs requirements on freight movements from GB to NI. However, it was originally postponed, and there was a grace period for 3 months to allow fast parcel operators to get their systems in place so that a similar requirement would be there for movements of parcels coming B2B. C2C, as in consumer to consumer, private individual to private individual from GB to NI, will never have customs attached. B2C, as in an economic operator, your Amazons, your eBay, any of your online stores selling to you, to a private consumer in Northern Ireland, you will not have customs declarations to complete for those movements. B2B, if you are authorised under the UK internal market system and your goods are not at risk of entering the EU single market, you will not have to complete supplementary declarations, but instead you will have a reduced data set of information, commercial information to provide, and we will be discussing that. B2B, that is at-risk B2B movements, will require the same full customs obligations to be met as are currently met for freight movements. In essence, we have had 3 3.75 of, so what have we had? 12, 24, 36, and we're into month 9. So 45 months of no customs requirements on fast parcel movements, effectively because of their size and weight. And those rules are changing on the 1st of October, and that is what we're going to spend a lot of time talking about today. Tariff rate quotas. This is where steel coming in from Great Britain, there was tariff set, a quota made available for Northern Ireland specific or UK specific movements to Northern Ireland. Outside of those tariffs, that is a quantity based amount of steel there would be a 25% tariff applied outside of those quotas, sorry. We had the introduction of a new duty rate reimbursement scheme for those companies who had paid duty and wanted to get a reimbursement. They can provide evidence that the goods that they had paid duty because they were deemed as at risk have remained within the United Kingdom, and then claim back the duty that they paid out. And we also got some new flexibilities around seed potato movements of plants and other agricultural machinery. And we had the change on human medicines to all be controlled and all be regulated under the UK MHRA. We've got simplifications for GB&I movements, removement of the need for pet passports in certain directions and so forth. And then we had the introduction of the stormont break. The stormont break was an added control where a petition of concern could be raised by more than one party within our assembly that would bring a concern about a change in EU legislation or the introduction of new EU legislation that allowed the UK government to enter into discussions and negotiations ultimately with the EU on our behalf. As you know, the Windsor Framework brought about with it a period of some stability, but ultimately we didn't get the return of our local government and assembly until February this year, a year after the Windsor Framework was announced. So I mentioned earlier some NI specific definitions, and these definitions weren't about prior to this arrangement and the unique trading environment that we have within Northern Ireland. So at risk and not at risk goods, you will hear mentioned often. In any normal customs movement scenario, when goods enter into the jurisdiction, be that a country or in the case of the European Union, the Single Market and Customs Union, they must meet all customs requirements. Because of the unique circumstances that exist for Northern Ireland, we had this definition of at risk and not at risk. And up until the 30th of September, so up until 2 weeks today, the 1st of October, not at risk goods for companies authorised and approved under the UK Trader Scheme initially and now under the UK Internal Market Scheme did not have to pay duty on those goods moving from GB to NI, and for goods moving from rest of world to NI, they were only liable for the UK duty and not, if it was higher, the EU duty. For at-risk goods, EU duty applied on these movements, and they were deemed as having to comply with all full import obligations from the 1st of October this year. How do you define a good as at risk or not at risk? For me, the simplest test that you can do is if you bring in an item and make it available for sale within Ireland or elsewhere in the EU, it's at risk. If you sell 0.5%, 1%, 20%, or 99%, it's at risk. If your goods are made available for sale within the European Union, they are at risk. If you're a commercial processor, there is additional conditions in there. If your turnover is more than 2 million, it was originally under the Northern Ireland Protocol 500,000. Even if you then only still sell within the internal UK market, anything that you bring in that is for sale is considered and deemed at risk, even if you don't sell within that EU single market. There is some other exemptions for commercial processors, and we will cover them in terms of construction, for feeds, animal feeds, charitable organisations bringing in goods for manufacture that aren't sold and so forth, and we will talk about those. You also have qualifying Northern Ireland goods. This is a very important one. This is where goods that are physically present, lawfully present, not under any special customs procedure at the point of sale in Northern Ireland, they are considered as qualifying Northern Ireland goods, and they benefit from unfettered access to the full UK market, i.e. Great Britain and Northern Ireland, but also the European Union market. Other qualifying Northern Ireland good definition is goods that are commercially processed or processed in Northern Ireland, but the catch-all one is physically located in Northern Ireland at the point of sale. If a good is sold, but it is previously, at the point of sale, is sitting in Ireland or elsewhere in the European Union, and then is moved to Northern Ireland, and from Northern Ireland to Great Britain, that is not a qualifying Northern Ireland good, because it was not physically located in Northern Ireland at the point of sale. Very, very important thing to remember. So who's affected by the Windsor Framework, the Northern Ireland Protocol? I'm assuming by your attendance at this webinar today that your company is impacted by the Northern Ireland Protocol and the Windsor Framework. But ultimately, any businesses headquartered in Northern Ireland, GB businesses with operations in Northern Ireland, EU businesses, including Ireland, with operations in NI, and any businesses outside of NI that trades with or through, that's important, through Northern Ireland. When we talk today, we talk about the UK and we'll talk about GB. GB, England, Scotland, Wales in terms of tariffs and so forth. UK, obviously, England, Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland. The UK left the European Union. Northern Ireland continues to benefit from access to the European Union single market for goods, and there's customs requirements on movement of goods from GB to NI as a result of the Windsor Framework Northern Ireland Protocol arrangements. I've looked at this, the UK Internal Market Scheme, but to quickly recap, what have we got? Up until now, the UK Internal Market Scheme has in many cases mirrored what was there previously with the UK Trader Scheme. If you brought goods in from Great Britain and were authorised under the UK Internal Market Scheme and your goods were deemed as not at risk of entering the EU single market, you would not be liable to pay EU tariffs on those goods. If you brought goods in from the rest of the world to NI and you were authorised, approved under the UK Trader Scheme and now the UK Internal Market Scheme, you would only pay the UK tariff on those goods. You would not be liable for the EU tariff. However, there is some differences in there, and there is some elements that have changed. We have certain goods that are always at risk, irrespective if a company is signed up for a UK Internal Market Scheme or not. If you're bringing in goods from rest of the world to NI, and the EU tariff is 3% or more higher than the UK tariff, your goods are deemed as at risk. If you're bringing in goods that have associated tariff rate quotas or other safeguarding tariffs such as anti-dumping duty, your goods are deemed at risk until you meet other requirements. For example, with tariff rate quotas, if you bring steel in, if you bring it in rest of world to NI, you have to check that there's EU quota available and UK quota. When you're bringing it in from GB to NI, you must check that there is available EU quota at the time of the movement and declare pull down that quota. For anti-dumping duty, an example I provided on my LinkedIn page a few weeks ago, mugs from porcelain mugs and China mugs coming from China have associated anti-dumping duty applied by the EU. This is an additional tariff above normal duty rates for these items because of the country that they are being, the country of origin of the goods. And this can be as specific, by the way, as the factory from where these goods have been moved. Because of these tariffs, anti-dumping duty applying, safeguarding tariffs applying, those goods are deemed as at risk And even if you are signed up to the UK Internal Market Scheme, they must be declared as at risk. You cannot bring them in via your UK Internal Market Scheme authorisation. There is, in addition to the requirements for normal standard traders, additional conditions on commercial processors. Under Article 5 of the protocol, anything that was processed in Northern Ireland was automatically deemed as at risk. This creates a lot of confusion. I've had people said to me in meetings, client meetings, said to me, we bring in materials, we turn them into something else worth many times the value of the goods that we originally brought in. We do not believe our goods are at risk. Your goods are automatically at risk. For companies with a turnover of less than 2 million, originally 500,000, if you only trade internally within the United Kingdom market, you can sign up for UKIMS and bring your goods in and declare them not at risk. If your turnover is more than 2 million per year, irrespective of if you only trade in the UK internal market or not, anything that you bring in for processing or sale is automatically deemed at risk. I would highlight at this point, I would recommend every company, irrespective of being a processor or a wholesaler, a retailer, or anything like that, irrespective if you trade into the EU single market or not, to sign up for the UK internal market scheme on the basis of goods that you bring in for internal business use only, i.e. consumables that you bring in, or if you purchase machinery or vehicles or furnishings or anything like that from GB. Because you do not want to have to use your de minimis allowance, or you do not want to have to be completing customs supplementary declarations from the 1st of October if there's an option not to, because these things have been brought in for internal business use. Big changes coming up now on the 1st of October, and this is the one that I think is going to impact a lot of businesses. For a lot of companies, Brexit is effectively happening on the 1st of October. From the 1st of October, fast parcel movements will require customs obligations to be met on them. As I said already, C2C movements, consumer to consumer movements, if you have a nephew, a child, a parent sending you something at Christmas or for your birthday from Great Britain to Northern Ireland, there will be no customs on that. If you're buying online from suppliers and it's going to you as the final destination to your private address in Northern Ireland, there will be no customs requirements on those fast parcel movements. Bear in mind, there should not have been customs requirements on freight movements going from business to private individuals as well, beyond an oral declaration or verbal conduct. For B2B, where they are not at risk because the company is signed up for the UK Internal Market Scheme and they are self-declaring their goods are not at risk of entering the EU single market, be very aware that you have to hold evidence for up to 5 years that these goods have not entered the EU single market. You will have to provide in advance a reduced status of information. It's 20, from when I look at it, it's a 20 odd fields as opposed to 80 plus fields. But you have to be signed up for the UK Internal Market Scheme, and you have to, your goods cannot be at risk of entering the EU single market. If you make your goods available for sale in the EU, 1% or 99%, your goods are at risk. I use this definition. I always use it. I use it because it's an easy way for me to try and get this point across. You can't be a little bit pregnant. Your goods are at risk if they are made available for sale within the European Union. For those B2B movements of goods that are at risk of entering the EU single market, from the 1st of October this year, you will have the full customs obligations to meet the same way as you did with freight movements since January 2021. Agri-food solutions, as I mentioned before, come in under the Windsor Framework Northern Ireland Retail Movement Scheme, another green lane and red lane scenario. Anything that is manufactured, processed, packaged, passes through and enters into free circulation within GB will, going through the Northern Ireland Retail Movement Scheme, can be sold on our shelves here in supermarkets and used by food producers and hospitals and public sector organisations without having to meet phytosanitary checks. They have to meet, obviously, UK public health checks and are bound by UK Public Health Authority. This is how we've seen the not for EU labelling introduced in our supermarkets over the last year or so. On the 1st of October 2024, we were also expected to see not for EU labelling rolled out across GB. And the reason given, provided by the previous government for this was that if it was only a requirement for not for EU labelling in Northern Ireland of these products, some suppliers, some producers, some processors may not continue to serve or may limit what they provide to the Northern Ireland market on the basis that the costs associated with it. And they tried to remedy this by making a requirement for not for EU labelling right across the whole of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. What we've been told is that the legislation required for this is not in place. You may or may not know that the UK Parliament has been on recess since the 12th of September and doesn't return until the 7th of October. So it will not be ready in time to implement this measure of introducing not for EU labelling across GB by the 1st of October. As I said, the introduction of stormont break, it has to be at the request of 30 plus MLAs from 2 or more political parties. It can't be 30 MLAs from one party to get the UK government to enter into discussions about significant impacting or economic, social impacts of changes to existing legislation or the introduction of new legislation in the EU. We have a timeline for things, and we see a lot of this is now already passed. We've got the duty reimbursement scheme in place with UKIMS application, replaced UKTS in June last year, opened application and replaced it in September last year. We've had introduction of visual inspections, not for EU labelling, came in under the Northern Ireland Retail Movement Scheme. And we had now got to the point where the 1st of October, new rules for parcels and the introduction of Green Lane under UKIMS, or as it's officially known, UK Internal Market System Lane, which was introduced under Windsor Framework. And then by winter 2025, we are anticipating that we will have full implementation of all arrangements under the Windsor Framework in place. We also have the small matter of a vote, the first of these votes on the continued implementation of the Northern Ireland Protocol Windsor Framework. That will take place later this autumn, start of winter in the Northern Ireland Assembly. If we have an overall majority, we will continue to operate under these movements, and we will have the next vote in 4 years' time. If we have an overall majority in both unionist designated MLAs and nationalist designated MLAs, the vote will be pushed out for 8 years, giving us a period of 8 years of hopefully stability and security. If we actually vote against continuing under these arrangements, we will enter into a 2-year period where we will continue to operate under the Windsor Framework arrangements, whilst we try and find a solution that allows us to continue to have an open land border on the island of Ireland. Okay, so we've got an addition under the Windsor Framework from the previous slide. So goods to and from Northern Ireland to the EU, including Ireland, remain unaffected or same as they have been since the Northern Ireland Protocol was introduced. Goods from NI to GB continue to be mostly unaffected, apart from them P&R goods. I also expect to see more intelligence-based and random checks on goods moving from NI to GB to ensure that they are qualifying Northern Ireland goods. My contacts within the haulage industry have informed me that these checks are already taking place. They're checking commercial invoices, they're checking paperwork, they want to ensure that it is not circumvention by traders in Ireland and elsewhere in the EU moving goods into Northern Ireland to get unfettered access into GB. Not at risk goods going from GB to NI will have the light touch, the reduced data set, no longer required to complete supplementary declarations, albeit that there is a requirement for a lot more information up front. Red lane, as is, for freight movements, we continue to have to complete supplementary declarations. If we're using TSS, we complete full frontier declarations. If we are using other customs providers, customs agents, cargo forwarders, duty tariffs will apply, which we can use waivers, de minimis waivers, if we have availability within our 300,000 euro allowance, rolling 3-year allowance, or we can use Northern Ireland Retail Movement Scheme, and the introduction of these same requirements from fast parcel operators.
Right.
We continue.
That because I won't.
Sorry, can somebody put their mute on, please? They've got themselves just on speaker, or mute has been turned off for a second. Thank you. For rest of world to NI movements, we continue to benefit from UK free trade agreements in export. In terms of imports, if the goods are at risk, they will have EU tariff supply rather than the UK tariffs. But again, we have duty reimbursement scheme in there if we can provide evidence that the goods ultimately did not enter the EU single market. And we also have the ability, if we pay duty, to then get that sent to our waiver account and get that reimbursed as well. Okay, next slide. UK Internal Market System lane, also previously known as the Green Lane. I think the new name came about with the Safeguarding the Union paper last year. For goods which are imported into and going to stay in Northern Ireland or returned to Great Britain. This is entirely, wholly, purely for sale, consumer end use in Northern Ireland and the United Kingdom. From the 30th of September, from the 1st of October, this day 2 weeks, you will no longer have to complete a full customs declaration. You can instead complete a reduced data set of information, a H8 I think it's called, and you will no longer have to complete supplementary declarations if you're clearing your goods through the Trader Support Service. You will no longer be subject to customs duty, and you will only require standard customs commercial information in the form of a 6-digit, in some cases 8-digit commodity code rather than the 10 you require for at-risk goods. Please remember the at-risk definition. This is extremely important, and please remember the goods that will always be deemed at risk until other requirements are met. Just going to take a quick drink here. Excuse me. Okay. Here is the reduced data set. Can somebody again has got their mute off, please, if you don't mind turning it back on for me, please. This is the reduced data set, has been provided by HMRC and His Majesty's Treasury around March, April time this year. I have a call tomorrow with HMRC. I'm going to see if there's an update on these fields. You will see that there is some mandatory, there is some that were required for controlled goods only, and you will see that there are some that will be optional, depend on the specific movement type. When I count the mandatories, I get about 22, 23 in there, which is significantly decreased from the 80 odd that are currently required for all movements, both at risk and not at risk, entering Northern Ireland from Great Britain. And if you're signed up for UK Internal Market System or Internal Market Scheme, any declarations you have at the moment and up until the 30th of September, it's your legal obligation to complete those. So the UK Internal Market Scheme replaced the UK Trader Scheme, allows businesses to self-cert. It's a self-cert. When you applied for the UK Internal Market Scheme, you tick 9 declarations. One of those declarations is that you will not use your authorization to move goods that are at risk of entering the EU single market. You are declaring that you will not use your authorization for that. Your letter of offer or your letter of authorization that you get from HMRC says that you're authorized, and again states very, very clearly that you cannot use this authorization for goods that are at risk of entering the EU single market. I have had companies tell me that they have applied for UK Internal Market Scheme and HMRC have told them that their goods are not at risk. No, they haven't. You are self-certing. The UK Internal Market Scheme, you're making 9 declarations. You're doing this through Government Gateway, and your letter of offer states very clearly what evidence you need to hold. I'm going to provide some quotes shortly directly from the Trader Support Service about when you can't use your UK Internal Market Scheme authorization. It was meant to be a case that you would have if you had any customs non-compliance issues, or if they would do checks as part of the application process, and everybody involved in the clearance process as well as the persons of significant control in the company are listed. Anybody making that application, you see where you give your information as part of the application process. I think, to be fair, HMRC were inundated with applications for this, and they are covering themselves on the basis that you sign these 9 declarations. Be very aware of those declarations that you've made, and your letter of offer clearly states when you can and when you can't use your authorization. So to register for UK Internal Market Scheme, if there's companies still there today that haven't registered for it, and this is for Northern Ireland companies, and registration, by the way, for UK Internal Market Scheme is open to GB and NI companies. So companies supplying on DDP terms and DDP, delivered duty paid Incoterms, to companies in Northern Ireland from GB can also sign up for UK Internal Market Scheme, or if they're selling directly to end users within Northern Ireland, they can sign up to the UK Internal Market Scheme. Bear in mind, if they're selling B2B, they have to get confirmation from their customer in Northern Ireland that their goods are not at risk, that they're bringing in. If they state that their goods are not at risk without checking, without clarifying this with their customers, the responsibility lies with them if they are the importer in Northern Ireland. So to sign up for it, the application is online. You Google it and you will find UK Internal Market Scheme application. You will require your XIEOI number. You will need to have access to a Government Gateway account because you make the application through your Government Gateway account. And you will need to be able to provide information around your systems and measures that you have in place to ensure that your goods are not at risk, or able to categorize goods that are not at risk from those that are risk. So there is, I have put together a small guide for this. I will make that available to InterTradeIreland, and they can, if required or requested, provide that to anybody listening here today. Businesses not eligible to use UKIMS for goods brought in, and I'm emphasising brought in for sale and or processing. If these goods are moving into Northern Ireland or potential risk of entering Ireland or elsewhere in the EU, subject to commercial processing unless in the exempt sectors or turnover threshold less than 2 million, and not selling into the EU, or you're not sure the destination of the goods at the point of import, that's important. If you make your goods available for sale in markets in the EU market as well as the internal UK market, your goods are at risk, and you will not be able to use your UK Internal Market Scheme authorization for importing these goods, i.e. you will not be able to use the UK Internal Market System lane, the green lane. Commercial processors, as I say, turnover less than 2 million. It was 500,000 under the original Northern Ireland Protocol. It was raised to 2 million, but you still must be trading entirely, wholly, purely within the internal UK market. Or operate in one of the following exempt trade sectors: food for sale to end consumers in the UK, construction where you're building a permanent part of a structure in Northern Ireland. I always look at this, it's a permanent part of a structure in Northern Ireland. Just be very careful about the wording of that. So it's been, if you're involved in construction and you're a permanent part of a structure being processed or built, manufactured here in Northern Ireland. And the criteria there applies to you and one subsequent entity if applicable. If you're in the healthcare industry, non-profit where you are manufacturing products that are not sold to its users, and animal feed, if you're bringing in animal feed to use yourself as a farmer or a seller of animal feed to farmers, can declare, even if they are in that manufacturing sector. Key points: if eligible businesses should register for UK Internal Market Scheme as a matter of priority, I would advise and suggest everybody should register, even if you are only able to use it for goods that you bring in for internal business use. Bear in mind that if you are, for example, a bus operator or a transport company and you purchase vehicles over in GB, electric vehicles, another example, if they are coming in for internal business use, that will remove the associated tariffs on those goods. Those goods can have tariffs between 10 and 22%, 22.5%, or for electric vehicles, they can have additional tariffs on top of those as well. That will remove those tariffs. You will not have to use your de minimis allowance or have to pay duty on those goods if you're signed up for UK Internal Market System or UK Internal Market Scheme and they're for internal use. You have to consider on an each shipment basis, not at risk element of it. So every time you bring in a consignment, you need to consider, is it at risk or not? Also consider those additional requirements or criteria where goods will automatically be at risk, i.e. anti-dumping, safeguarding tariffs attached or tariff rate quotas attached. If registered for UKIMS, you must continue to submit subdecs up until the 30th of September. You will continue, if you're moving goods in from GB to NI, continue to have supplementary declarations to complete. These must be completed. It's a legal obligation to do so. Declaring goods is at risk or not at risk. This is the quote that I got recently from engagement with TSS. And I'm going to read this because I think it's very important, and it's the clearest quote I've got yet from the Trader Support Service. Breaking news is the Trader Support Service has been extended for a further year up until the end of 2025. There will be a period of open tendering and review from early 2025, but there's been an extension of the TSS service that was due to end now in December 2024, but they've got a 1-year extension with an open tendering process starting in 2025 so that we continue to have access to a facility, a free at source portal to complete customs declaration requirements on GB-NI movements and rest of world NI movements outside of safety and security declarations post 2026. But I'm going to read this quickly. So in response to a question that I put to TSS around at risk and not at risk, and potentially declaring something not at risk that you found out afterwards was at risk, please make sure that you're using the UK Internal Market Scheme correctly under the terms of the scheme and comply with the compliance requirements of the scheme. You need to know at the time of movement that goods are not at risk of entering the EU and that goods will remain in the UK internal market. It is the responsibility of the UKIMS authorisation holder, i.e. you, to know this for the goods movements, and you need to be able to evidence this and hold supporting records of the movements for 5 years. If you cannot evidence at the time of goods movements that those goods are not at risk, then you cannot declare those goods as not at risk under UKIMS. If the compliance requirements of UKIMS is followed, the above should not happen. That's in relation to my question about wrongly declaring goods as not at risk that were at risk. But I do believe it can happen and is potentially likely to happen after the fast parcel movements come into play in 1st of October. In cases where this does happen, per gov.uk advice, you need to let HMRC know that the goods were declared incorrectly. If you declared your goods not at risk by mistake, you should apply for a voluntary clearance amendment under payment from HMRC. That's a C2001 form. That's the clearest definition yet that I've received after many requests from TSS. So, at-risk goods will enter Northern Ireland under the red lane arrangement, and that's goods moving from GB to NI that are destined for the EU or at risk of entering the EU because you make available for sale your products in the EU are subject to full customs checks and controls, including tariffs and sanitary phytosanitary controls to protect the integrity of the EU single market. So navigating tariff requirements, there is, I remember TSS very early on talked about a hierarchy of risk. And at the top of that hierarchy of risk is the EU third country tariff, the common external rate tariff, zero? If it is zero, you do not have any duty to pay. Up until January, February, maybe March this year, anything with a 0% tariff on it, you would have declared under NIREM, the NI Additional Information Code NIREM, which is Northern Ireland Remain. But that changed and you now declared under Northern Ireland Aid, NI Aid, because ultimately 0% of something is still £0, so you can declare it under that. We've brought in 2 new codes earlier this year in early spring this year, NI Pro and NI Quo. Albeit that they sound like nicotine replacement products. NI Quo is in relation to Northern Ireland quota, where there's tariff rate quotas on products. Again, previously, once we had checked quota, we would have declared those under NIREM. You now add the additional code NI Quo. And if you're a commercial processor, moving goods in that do not meet the threshold for turnover, or do not meet the eligibility criteria for UKIMS, you declare them as Northern Ireland Processing NI Pro code. The next one on the list was if you're UKIMS registered, your UK Trader Scheme registered, and your goods are not at risk of entering the EU single market. That would remove the tariff on those goods. Third one is if the goods met UK preferential origin criteria, i.e. because they were manufactured within the UK or they had been originated within the UK. Under the UK-EU Trade and Cooperation Agreement, you could declare those goods as you could declare those goods under preferential origin, removing the tariffs, and that had additional code requirements: U110, U111, U112. 300 code instead of 100 on TSS, and addition of a statement or importer's knowledge in there. You needed to provide the statement was either on an invoice we'd undersigned with the RIORI number, declare unless otherwise stated that these goods have been manufactured within the United Kingdom, or for multiple movements over a period of up to 12 months, you could have a statement, a certificate of origin. I'm very conscious of time, Marcus, so I'm going to go through these a bit quickly. As I say, UK origin, you can declare them under preference under the Trade and Cooperation Agreement negotiated on Christmas Eve, nothing like leaving it to the last minute 2020. So rest of world NI movements, if your goods are at risk, EU tariffs apply, but you will undergo the same import obligation requirements as you would for not at risk goods. You're checking to make sure that they meet EU and UK import controls and measures. Customs Duty Waiver Scheme, I referred to this earlier. You have the ability, in addition to preferential origin, UKIMS or 0% tariff, if there's a tariff on goods that you bring in from GB to NI, you have the ability to use your de minimis waiver account to remove the associated tariff. We all have a €300,000 rolling de minimis allowance. That's every company in every company within the European Union. This is when we talk about the level playing field. No company in any member state is allowed to receive de minimis state aid above €300,000, which would provide to them an unfair advantage over any other company operating as a part of the EU Single Market and Customs Union. The UK negotiated, Michael Gove back in December 2020, negotiated that for at-risk goods moving from GB to NI, you could waive the associated tariff on those goods. And for rest of world to NI movements, you could waive the tariff element, but the difference between the UK and EU tariff if the EU tariff was higher. You need to sign up for this to be able to use the NIAID NI Additional Information Code. You have to sign up for the HMRC Government Digital Waiver account, and that is where you complete returns and you notify the UK government of de minimis state aid received externally, i.e. from apprenticeship schemes, support from InterTradeIreland would be de minimis state aid, and other support that you might get from Invest NI or other bodies. Okay. Duty Reimbursement Scheme introduced under the Windsor Framework. Duty Reimbursement Scheme is where you have paid the duty and you want to get it reimbursed. You can ask for it to be reimbursed if you can provide evidence that those goods have remained within the UK internal market, or you can ask to have it transferred to your duty waiver scheme, i.e. if you paid the duty and you want to then instead transfer to your duty waiver account because you weren't aware of it maybe at the time of the movement, you can get it transferred and get that duty repaid. Bear in mind it takes 4 months. There's 120 days for the duty reimbursement to be made. So that is going to impact cash flow. And why is that very, very important? And I'm conscious of time, Marcus, but this is extremely important part of this today. So I'm going to give 10 minutes or 15 minutes on this, if you permit me to.
That's no problem, Jonathan. You work away. We will still endeavour to make sure that we get as many questions as possible answered. And if we run a few minutes over, that's no problem at all.
Okay. So thank you, Marcus. As I said earlier, we have the introduction of customs requirements on fast parcel movements from the 1st of October. 45 months or so after the Northern Ireland Protocol and the introduction of these arrangements for freight movements, they are now being introduced for fast parcel operators, FPOs. This is parcel movements under a certain weight and of a certain size. We had a really strange situation over the last couple of years that many of you may be aware of. I had a scenario where I had a client company completing customs obligations on a pallet load of bubble wrap that they brought in to package up their products, worth £30-40, whilst another company was bringing in thousands of pounds worth of IT hardware via a fast parcel operator and didn't have to complete customs declarations on it. And clearly that was unfair. If you were able to bring parcels in, bring your products in parcels, you were not having to meet these obligations. You were not having to be registered for TSS. You were not having to worry about duty waiver accounts or duty reimbursement schemes. So this has been introduced now. And for a lot of companies, this will be their first time having to actually deal with the workings of the Windsor Framework and Northern Ireland Protocol. And bear in mind that original figure of 62% of businesses surveyed saying they had no knowledge of the Windsor Framework, and nearly half of the 26% who said they're impacted by Brexit having no knowledge of the Windsor Framework. I would doubt that we will have anywhere near that percentage at the end of the next quarter who are not aware of the implications and the implementation of the Windsor Framework if they're receiving parcels. We also had a situation where one time a client of mine would have a supplementary declaration to complete because it was brought in the pallet, but the following week they got the exact same thing again, but that time it had been put in as 10 boxes, and as it came through a fast parcel operator on the second occasion, it didn't require customs. So they're being introduced. As I said, if you're a consumer purchasing from an economic operator online, Amazon, an e-commerce site, anything like that, getting it delivered to your own personal residence, your final home destination, you should not see any issues with customs. You will not have to meet customs requirement. You will not have duty to pay on goods coming from GB to NI, like would be the case if you had something coming in from the US, or since Brexit, companies in GB have faced when goods coming in from EU. If you are if you have family members or friends over in Great Britain sending you parcels from GB to NI, there will be no customs on those movements. If you are B2B, you will have hopefully received correspondence from your fast parcel operator, FedEx, UPS, DX, DHL, any one of these operators out there, or slowly but surely getting in touch now with their customers. And they're asking them to sign a declaration, a statement, indicating that they accept them being their customs representative. They are asking them then to advise their UK Internal Market System or UK Internal Market Scheme, their UKIMS authorisation number, if their goods are not at risk of entering the EU single market. And if they are at risk, they are notifying them that, and I will be happy to be proven wrong, but I'm not aware of at this moment of any fast parcel operator who is providing an option for their customers to self-declare or to use NIAID and their de minimis allowance. They are notifying them that customs will be applied where applicable, and they can claim that back through the duty reimbursement scheme. My concern is, because I've seen some of these letters, that they're asking if you have a duty deferment account. Duty deferment account in Northern Ireland requires a customs comprehensive guarantee. A comprehensive guarantee is with your bank or with an insurance company. You need to calculate what size of a guarantee you require. That is based on movements that you would have open at any one time, typical tariffs on those movements, value of those movements. You then tell your bank or insurance company the amount that you require in a guarantee, and then they will ring fence that in your bank account and charge you for the privilege. So a duty deferment account is not really something that is a viable option for many micro and SME businesses. TSS allows micro and SME businesses to use their TSS duty deferment account for freight movements. That's why when we do custom freight simplified procedures, we do not have to pay duty on those goods until we custom clear them by completing the subdeck on the 10th day, because we've had that ability through the simplified the declaration procedure that is used just in time, where information is provided afterwards to use their duty deferment account. If you're being asked by your fast parcel operator if you have a duty deferment account and you don't, I would check if they will allow you to use their duty deferment account. If they are, find out if they're going to charge you for use of the duty deferment account. If they aren't, you need to find out, will they require payment of the duty up front? I.e., will they, if you're not available to receive your parcel, will they hold it until you make payment? These are some of the questions that are going to be out there. So, customs declarations introduced and payment of applicable tariffs. This is going to be one of the biggest impacts that I foresee over the next number of months, because I have a lot of companies that have contacted me in the last few weeks that are absolutely not prepared for this. They have not required to be signed up to TSS because they've never brought in any freight movements. They had not signed up for the UK Internal Market scheme because they didn't require because there was no customs duty or administrative requirements on the parcels that they receive. They are not aware of the duty reimbursement scheme. They are not signed up for the digital waiver system, even albeit that as it stands today, it doesn't look like parcel operators are going to allow us to waive the duty up front. You will also see, by the way, when you get a declaration form from your fast parcel operator that they're indicating that they will be acting as a direct customs representative, albeit that the carrier application for the scheme appears to indicate that they need to act as indirect customs representatives. A direct representative acts in your name, but you are liable for the information provided. And the indirect customs representative acts in both your name and their name. They're the declarant and they have liability as well for the movement. It's very, very unusual that any customs agency will act as an indirect customs representative for you. They will want to be acting as a direct representative. TSS, by the virtue of the fact that they have this customs freight simplified procedure approach to, where you complete a simple frontier declaration followed by a supplementary declaration after the movement takes place, they are an indirect customs representative for companies using it, unless you use their assisted declaration service where they ask you to sign off that they will act as a direct representative for you. So, in preparation for the introduction of the UK Internal Market System lane and for the movement, fast parcel movements coming online for customs, in May this year, HMRC sent out notifications about getting trader goods profiles set up, and TSS were going to assist companies in identifying a 6 to 8 digit commodity code for all the goods that they typically brought in. Unfortunately, what I've seen so far in this, and through my attempts to engage with the team within HMRC, to date, I have seen very little about the trader goods profile, but I'm hoping that that will change over the next couple of weeks, and that comes into play. Same way, if I go online to look for the simplified process for internal market movements or internal market movement information, there is a lot of cases, I haven't checked it in the last week or two, and I must check it again, but there was holding pages rather than any information available. So companies are at that, the finishing line and still haven't had a chance to get their runners on in a lot of cases. So be aware that your commodity codes, be aware of commercial invoice requirements. Again, we're in a situation where GB to NI movements, the exporter, the supplier in GB is not legally required to provide you with a commercial invoice. But we here in Northern Ireland, requiring the complete customs declarations, require the information, i.e. HS commodity codes, country of origin, item values, item weights, in order to be able to complete our import administrative obligations. So your commodity codes, be aware of the requirement to know these. For at risk, it's 10 digits. An export commodity code is 8 digits. You can Google Northern Ireland tariff schedule or Northern Ireland EU tariff schedule, that will bring it up. There is a separate UK global tariff schedule. Just make sure you're looking at the Northern Ireland specific one. And that commodity code and the country of origin will determine if there is what the tariff is and what conditions there is in the movement of those goods, and potentially by the country of origin there may be additional anti-dumping duty, or because of the type of product, tariff rate quotas and other safeguarding tariffs attached. Key tips Key information required. You will hear it known as a HS code, harmonized system code, a nomenclature code, a tariff code, a classification code, a commodity code. 8 digits on export, 10 digits when importing. So if you're given an 8-digit code, you need to work out what the remaining 2 digits are. A lot of the times it might be 00, but it could be 10, 20, 30, 40, 99, 90 for those last 2 digits. And as well as your commodity code, you need the country of origin. You are responsible as the importer, the exporter of record, but in the case of GB&I movement, there is no export requirements. You are responsible for as the importer that the code that you're using is right. And the only way you can guarantee that is by getting an advanced ruling from HMRC or a BTI, a binding tariff information agreement in place. Incoterms. This dictates who's responsible. If it's X works, that means that you take ownership and responsibility for the goods from when you lift them from the premises. You organise the haulage, the transport of the goods. There is no export declarations on GB&I movements, so there's no export safety and security declaration or export declaration. DAP, delivered at place, means that haulage is organised by your supplier. DDP, delivered duty paid, means that your supplier is the importer in Northern Ireland and therefore they are responsible for the completion of customs declaration for their goods. If they tell you it's DDP and it's sitting on your trader support account, it's DAP. If it's DDP and in your account, you need to get that reassigned to the correct company if it is under those terms. It covers who's responsible for loading, unloading, transport, delivery, insurance, goods in transit insurance, things like that, customs duty, VAT in some cases, clearance requirements. Does not cover your contract with your supplier. It doesn't cover things like price, timing and methods of payments, or remedies in event of a breach of contract. It's all to do with the movement of the goods, the customs and so forth within that movement. Okay, some graphs in there. And now we get to the end, the key points. I know I've spoken for the guts of an hour and 25 minutes and there's a lot to cover. This is why I would highly, highly recommend anybody here today to engage with InterTradeIreland under the cross-border trade hub, the voucher scheme, to get one-to-one support, be that initial generic telephony high-level support or via bespoke tailored support received virtually or in person from an approved service provider. There is a list of approved service providers on the InterTradeIreland website. As Marcus says at the beginning, for the Insight, my own company, we are approved service providers for several InterTradeIreland programs. So you must continue to complete customs declaration until 30th of September. Despite what people said back in February this year, so people who should know better, the requirement to complete GB2ANI customs declarations did not end. It has not ended and it will remain for the next 2 weeks for all products, and for at-risk movements will continue thereafter from the 1st of October. Sign up for the UK Internal Market Scheme. At the moment, that removes tariffs on not at-risk goods, i.e. goods that you know that will remain entirely, wholly, purely within the internal UK market. I recommend that even if you do not meet the criteria, your goods at risk, that you sign up for UKIMS for movement of goods for internal business use, consumables that you bring in for use within your business, vehicle purchases, IT purchases, furnishing purchases, etc. If you move goods which are at risk, you must continue to complete all customs declaration for freight movements and pay or waive any applicable tariffs upon entry into Northern Ireland. Speak to your fast parcel operator about the new processes from 1st of October. I know that a lot of cases your supplier has been organising the fast parcel operator. Talk to your supplier. Make sure they know if you or your goods are not at risk. Provide them with your UK Internal Market Scheme authorisation number. Give them the details. declare if their goods are at risk or not at risk. In some cases, you may have always at risk, never at risk, or sometimes at risk from suppliers. You need to look at each individual movement, be that fast parcel or freight movement, and declare it correctly. You are responsible. You will have to hold evidence. Register for the HMRC digital service that allows you to claim a customs duty waiver and report and record any external de minimis aid. It's an obligation, even if it's a null return, to respond and complete that return every 90 days. And if you do pay duty, you may be eligible to claim a repayment or remission of import duty, i.e. transfer to your waiver account through the duty reimbursement scheme. Those are the key takeaways that I have here today. So I'm going to hand back to Marcus just to wrap it up. Thank you, guys.
Okay, thank you very much, Jonathan. And there are quite a number of questions. Before I go into some of the questions, I just want to re-emphasize a couple of points. First of all, as Jonathan said quite rightly, we offer fully funded one-to-one support to help with not only customs but also VAT, regulation and cross-border employment matters. But by attending this webinar today, you'll be able to access this fully funded support. We will links just literally gone in the chat there now. We will also send that link out separately after the webinar today. I strongly encourage you, even if you think you're doing everything right, that you avail of this support. Get either Jonathan or one of our other consultants to sit with you on a one-to-one basis and really just review your entire customs processes, make sure you're compliant, and identify any areas which can be streamlined or where costs can be saved. Additionally, as well as this webinar, we are running a series of webinars over the next couple of months, starting again next week, preparing for a customs audit. So one of the questions we get asked quite a bit is, what happens if I get an audit? What information do I need? What will an audit entail, etc., etc. If you obviously by attending today's webinar, you obviously have got an interest in the area of customs. That I highly recommend that anyone who's on this webinar should also consider, if you have not done so already, registering for that webinar. It'll be next Wednesday, on the 25th, because you will see really a lot of really good information that if you ever are asked to participate in an audit by HMRC, Revenue, or another authority, what information and what steps you should take to prepare and make sure that you are fully compliant in advance of that audit. Additionally, if you're interested in selling cross-border between Northern Ireland and Ireland, we have 2 webinars coming up in October relating to that, where again we have one of our leading consultants who will come on and speak to you about practical advice, hints and tips, things you should consider before selling cross-border. So if you're new to selling cross-border, or you just want to increase your sales cross-border, or you want to make sure you're following best practice, again, highly recommend you join them. And then lastly, on the 19th of November, we're also hosting a webinar on cross-border employment. So if you are an employee who works cross-border, wants to work cross-border, if you're an employer who has staff working cross-border, please, I highly recommend you join that webinar. There'll be a lot of very useful information, particularly around things like hybrid working, where you maybe have staff working a number of days a week in one jurisdiction and a number of days a week in another jurisdiction. So there's some really interesting and really quite topical guidance there in that webinar, which I would strongly recommend that you would avail of. Following that, there as well, there'll be another slide here just on contact details. If you want to get in touch with any of us here at InterTradeIreland, you can either access our internet trade hub via that link, or you can also contact either myself or my colleague Martina, who also works alongside me here on the InterTradeIreland trade hub, if you have any questions relating to today's webinar or any of the supports we offer. I just want to go through, I apologise we're running a wee bit late, but I think it's important that we go through as many of the questions as we possibly can. We've got some really interesting questions come in. I'm just going to go from the top of these questions here and work our way down. Jonathan, basically the first question we got is regarding sort of, I think this probably combines a bit of sort of labelling guidance and also at risk. Are products that are marked in for price in sterling but aren't labelled not for sale in the EU considered at risk?
Okay, Marcus, say that again to me, please, just to get my head
Sorry,
around.
yeah. Are products which are marked as for price in sterling, but they're not labeled not for sale in the EU, are these products considered at risk?
Okay, so the not for EU labelling is specific to products that fall under the Northern Ireland Retail Movement Scheme, and this was a staggered introduction for products. The first products you may recall at the time that it came in for was meats and stuff like that there, and it would go out to composite products over the up until the end of 2025. So a product, if it's priced in sterling, it's irrelevant, to be honest with you. If I'm buying from a supplier in GB to NI, I can purchase in sterling, I can purchase in euro, I can purchase in dollar, I can purchase in whatever pricing they choose to provide. The at risk element ultimately comes down to one, you must be authorised for UK Internal Market Scheme to be able to declare goods not at risk. And two, if your goods are made available for sale within the EU, even if you don't sell anything, but you've made them available for sale, they are deemed as at risk under the Windsor Framework. Now, I don't know from that question if we're talking about sanitary, phytosanitary products, i.e. animal products, plant products. The Northern Ireland Retail Movement Scheme allowed products that would be prohibited, restricted goods such as chilled meats to move in to Northern Ireland which wouldn't have been able to move into the EU from a third country from outside the EU. If you're moving in sanitary, phytosanitary products that can be sold in the EU, you need to go down the route of CHED documentation and, if applicable, export health certificates and so forth for those products. The pricing won't dictate anything. It's just it's just common what we would purchase it in as. If we have a case where you have a GB company moving goods from GB company moving goods into NI and then on to Ireland, we enter into there's customs and VAT to consider that. On the customs end of it, they can declare it as at risk, clear the goods in Northern Ireland and meet all of those requirements. However, if the goods have been sold when they're in GB, the VAT element of it, it's entered free circulation in Northern Ireland and UK VAT will apply. It's a different thing, Marcus, but it's very hard to answer without knowing a lot more of the background on it.
Yeah, that's no problem at all. And I suppose, again, just to clarify, if you're looking at any more information on that particular area, do access the one-to-one support as well. Next question is relating to sort of Northern Ireland qualifying goods, and again, not at risk. If you're selling at a retail location that's located close to the border, and someone from Ireland comes in and purchases an item, does that impact whether it's at risk or not?
It's a great question. If you are a bricks and mortar conventional store in Northern Ireland that does not make available for sale any of your products online to anywhere outside of Northern Ireland or the UK, irrespective if somebody comes in from the Republic of Ireland, China, America, or anywhere else, your goods are not at risk. You do not, if they take those products with them thereafter, that is up to them. It's essentially the same as that X works element of it, where in a B2B scenario, you have sold it to them. What they do with it thereafter is, their responsibility. But it doesn't impact the not at risk element of it if you are selling within the internal market here in the UK.
Excellent, excellent. Next question is relating to the UK Internal Market Scheme, and particularly the commercial processing element to it. What happens if a business who obviously has gained UKIMS authorization subsequently exceeds the £2 million turnover threshold?
Yeah, another great question. So the 2 million threshold is written in stone at the moment. As I say, I was in Westminster last week, and I was there with representatives from some trade associations, and there's companies that are trading over the 2 million threshold but they only sell within the United Kingdom internal market and are happy to provide legal assurances of that to the UK and EU. But unfortunately, that threshold is 2 million. So if you are over that threshold, you no longer meet the criteria, the eligibility criteria. It's the same as a flat rate scheme for VAT. It's under 150, 155,000 of a turnover. It's the same as, having to register for VAT when your turnover, or as soon as you know that your turnover is going above that 85,000 threshold. If you are above that threshold, if you know you're going to go above that threshold within the next 30 days, you must notify HMRC, and you no longer can declare goods as not at risk because you do not meet the criteria. But a fantastic question.
Okay. Thank you, Jonathan. The next question here concerns the duty reimbursement scheme and the duty waiver scheme. So basically there's a specific scenario whereby the duty reimbursement scheme does not cover the duty waiver, where which is businesses claimed, and basically goods were subsequently sold in Northern Ireland. Is there any scheme going to be coming in place whereby a business, if goods were claimed the duty waiver but subsequently sold in Northern Ireland, that they can have that reinstated to their de minimis allowance?
Another fantastic question, and one we put to HMRC and officials on a number of occasions, because clearly, if the easiest way for a lot of companies, Marcus, is to declare everything as at risk and use their waiver. Because if you declare it under preferential origin, you require that statement I said, or you have importer's knowledge. Importer's knowledge flips the responsibility to you from your supplier. If you are declaring it under UK internal market scheme, you have to hold evidence for 5 years that those goods have remained within the UK internal market. We had apportionment, by the way, under the old scheme, UK trader scheme, as where you could declare a percentage of goods not at risk and percentage as at risk. That is not available under the new UK internal market scheme. So companies, I would advise where a company is moving goods and won't get very near their €300,000 allowance to use NIAID and their waiver, because it's the easiest way and they don't have to hold all this evidence. But I completely understand that there's companies that, depending on the type of goods that they're bringing in, they could use this 300,000 quickly, especially if they're bringing in products with tariff rate quotas of 25% attached to them. As it stands, and I'm sorry, that was a politician's answer, not as it stands, there is no plan at the moment to have a reimbursement onto the waiver account if you can provide evidence that those goods remain within UK or NI. But we will continue to ask for that, because it's a rolling 300,000 allowance, i.e. it's the current financial year, 6th of April 2024 to the 5th of April 2025, and the 2 years previous to that. So on the 6th of April 2025, any de minimis allowance that you've claimed within the period 6th of April 2022 to the 5th of April 2023 will drop off and go back onto your account and be available to use again. But unfortunately, at the moment, we do not have anything telling us that you're going to be able to remove it, get it back onto your waiver scheme. Also, very good preemptive, or just maybe preempting here, evidence that you require to declare goods and hold for goods that not at risk. If you sell B2B, you need from your supplier their authorization. You need a statement from the supplier that they only sell within the internal UK market. You can also put on your invoices, these goods have been sold for use within the internal UK market only, for use or sale within the internal UK market. I have asked for clarification what other things can be done on that. So it's very, very important that you meet those criteria. Whilst you cannot get reimbursed or reinstated onto your waiver account with evidence. You can, where you paid duty, subsequently get it remissed onto your de minimis waiver account and get reimbursed that duty. But there is a 4-month, 120 days turnaround for that.
Okay. On the subject of turnaround, we've got a question here. Businesses applied for UKIMS on the 31st of August and received confirmation that the application was received. They've since heard nothing back. Do you have any idea what the approximate response time on a UKIMS application would be?
No, it can vary. At this time, I have no doubt that there's a significant increase in applications, Marcus. But
Yeah.
I have seen for very simple applications turnaround of a couple of hours. I've seen applications take a couple of weeks. But I would say that if you're not hearing anything by the end of this week, get back in touch with them again, because your applications, even though it has been sent electronically, can get lost in the system.
Okay.
And, if you're concerned about it, then you're not getting a response, reapply.
Yeah.
Put it in again. But there will be an email address that you can send to, to engage with them, or even respond to the email that you receive from them. I think it's either ukims@hmrc.gov.uk or UK Internal Market Scheme. I think it's ukims@hmrc.gov.uk that you can put in. Hopefully they've kept a copy. Always save a copy of your application at the end of the process, and then you can attach that to your email and say, look, can you give me an update on this?
Okay, that's perfect. Well, what we'll do is we'll also hook out that email address and send it through as well, just so you all have it. Again, quite a few questions around the sort of the £2 million threshold for commercial processing. First of all, there's one quite specific, but before we go into that one, can you just re-emphasize just the requirements around the sort of the £2 million threshold for commercial processing?
Yeah, no problem. So, and again, there's no buy ball here, Marcus. You can't have a turnover less than 2 million and sell into the EU single market. You must meet the eligibility criteria for UKIMS, standard eligibility criteria, but then you have additional criteria for commercial processors. As I said, under Article 5 of the Northern Ireland Protocol, which still applies, Windsor Framework was revisions and reviews within the remit of that protocol arrangement in the first instance. We can now call the Northern Ireland Protocol the Windsor Framework, the Windsor Agreement, the Windsor Accord, we can call it, or the Northern Ireland Protocol. There was an exemption for companies with a turnover less than 500,000 that traded only internally within the UK. And there was exemptions for those other sector-specific ones. They increased that threshold to 2 million. UK government at the time said that would allow 4 out of 5 manufacturers within the UK to meet the criteria for UKIMS authorisation. Whilst manufacturing NI would probably have said 4 out of 5 manufacturing companies within Northern Ireland would not meet that criteria, be it that their turnover is more than 2 million, or because they trade externally and into the EU single market. So that 2 million threshold, not trading into the EU single market, you can be authorised for the materials and goods that you bring in from GB to NI as not at risk, as long as they don't fall in. If it's steel that you bring in that has tariff rate quotas, that is at risk and cannot be declared under NIREM, or anything that is anti-dumping duty attached to it, fixtures and fitting, bends, and you will remember this, Marcus, as well, bends and piping. It came in, I think, on Valentine's Day 2022 or something like that. There's heavy 80-odd% anti-dumping duty on certain types of piping and things like that. They cannot be declared as not at risk under UKIMS, even if you are authorised and meet the criteria as a commercial processor. So the threshold is 2 million. If your turnover is more than 2 million, as it stands today, your goods are automatically at risk. That means that you are having to mitigate any associated duty. you are having to complete customs declaration, continue to complete customs declarations for anything that you bring in for sale or processing 1st of October on. But you mitigate risk by use of preference where it's available, return goods relief where it's available for goods that were previously in free circulation in the EU prior to movement to GB and onward movement to NI, or your de minimis allowance, or ultimately if you have to pay the duty out, duty reimbursement scheme to claim it back afterwards. But that 2 million threshold is 2 million threshold. I know that there's been lobbying by Northern Ireland Chamber, by Manufacturing NI, by the Road Haulage Association and others to try and get that threshold extended and to get companies that have been excluded purely on the basis of their turnover included. And hopefully that is something that there will be continued negotiation between the UK and EU on. But as it stands today, that it's final.
Okay, yeah, no, thank you very much for clarifying that. The next question is related to UKIMS and Parcels. So we have a question here in from a business saying that they've had some communication with various couriers, and the couriers seem to assume that businesses are UKIMS registered. Can you clarify if a business is non-UKIMS authorized, and they're obviously bringing parcels in, I assume from GB, what the process is, who is the one physically completing the movement?
So we're at the power of the fast parcel operators on this, but a fast parcel operator that is assuming that their customers are UKIMS authorised is leaving themselves exposed. They have had to sign up for the UK carrier scheme. They have taken a number of conditions and responsibilities onto themselves under the UK carrier scheme. I believe, from what I've been told last week in London, that they will fall in as a direct representative. So if they are assuming that that they are the goods that they move are not at risk and that the company is UKIMS authorised, it'd be interesting to see who they're putting down as the declarant, as the person, or sorry, they will be the declarant, but they will be putting you down as the importer of record, and that responsibility comes back to you. They shouldn't be assuming, and it's not a loophole. There is no such thing as a loophole in these systems. I've heard so many people talk about loopholes before, but UK carrier scheme, they should be asking you for your authorization. They should be asking you to complete a declaration that they will act as your customs representative. I think it will say that they are acting as a direct, but I potentially believe that under the UK carrier scheme, they are acting as an indirect one. I need that confirmed. If you will then need to declare on a parcel by parcel basis if it is at risk or not. If your supplier has been looking after this for you up until now, equally, they should not be assuming that your goods are not at risk. You need to be telling them, because ultimately it comes down to the importer to be responsible for this and to ensure it. But that's why I said, Marcus, that I expect that there will be parcels wrongly declared as not at risk initially. And we will want to see how that can be retrospectively, dealt with thereafter. But the vast majority of companies that I'm seeing, fast parcel operators, are asking for UKIMS authorization, a declaration, and on an individual parcel by parcel basis that the goods are at risk or not at risk.
Yep. Okay. No, that's really useful advice. And as if anyone has any more questions around parcels, please do get in touch. We know it's a very key area at the minute, and we have one-to-one support available with our consultants to help you navigate what is a very significant change.
So sorry, Marcus. The obligations of the scheme. Apologies for interrupting you.
Okay.
So for companies signed up, fast parcel operators signed up for the UK carrier scheme, obligations, once you've been authorised as a carrier, you have a number of obligations you must meet on an ongoing basis. You need to establish the parcels that you're moving under the UK carrier scheme are being sent according to the criteria and conditions of the scheme. This will include complying with weight limits, meeting any additional requirements for their very limited range of Category 1 goods, like endangered species, making sure goods are being to sent to or from a private individual for those ones with no customs. You must collect data and share this with HMRC within relevant timeframes. The data will be based on information you hold and that you get from the sender when they purchase shipment or postage. You'll also need to work with and share data with HMRC to help manage the risk of parcels moving incorrectly under UKC arrangements. You must follow guidance to make a suspicious activity report to HMRC about movements where you want to report a clear breach of the UK carrier scheme. You must respond to any requests from HMRC for further information. You must also comply with any instructions from HMRC that relate to goods moved under the scheme. A lot of responsibility being put on the carrier on that scheme to ensure that they are taking on the responsibility there, as well as the importer under that scheme.
Yep, no, that's really good information to know. Thank you, Jonathan. The next question is related to sort of some of the upcoming changes. Will the reduced data set, presumably relating to green lane movements, be auto-generated from the ENS? And is an SFD still required? And then the second part of that question, are traders required to do anything on their trading profile in advance of the 1st of October?
So, if we look back on the ENS, so at the moment the process is an ENS is a safety and security declaration, which is a legal obligation responsibility of the carrier, the haulier, albeit that they will pass a charge on to their customers, administrative cost on to their customers for having to do this. That auto generates a simplified frontier declaration. And then we have the supplementary declaration, which is completed for at-risk movements, at the moment for all movements, but for at-risk movements. The reduced data set that I shared earlier on, it is understood that the information that is required to meet the reduced data set should be available from commercial documents. The example the UK government gave at the time was it would be the same information would be required to go from GB mainland to the Isle of Wight, or for goods moving anywhere in GB. But the problem is that we were told, in my opinion, the problem is that we were told that we would have a trader goods profile in place at this stage for our goods, and those goods that typically were moved as not at risk by traders, and that isn't there, and that is going to hold things up. And also bear in mind that the simplified reduced data set must be provided in advance of the movement. So the ENS element of it, as I understand it, remains. The simplified frontier declaration is the reduced data set, but there's more information required than is currently in that simplified frontier declaration. At the moment, you have a description of the goods, which I know and you know, Mark, it should be sufficient for those goods to be physically identifiable by a customs agent.
Yes.
For example, boxes of polo shirts, Fruit of the Loom, multiple sizes, colours, boxes of 100. What we're seeing is clothes. If it's parts for a machine, we're seeing parts. If we're seeing machinery, we're seeing machinery instead of something that will identify it. That is changing, as is the system with ENS, Safety and Security Declarations in the EU this autumn, where we're moving to that 8-digit commodity code, most cases 6-digit commodity code in description. And then the rest of the information should flow through. I'm not privy to the way that TSS is going to do this with regards to not at risk movements. And from what I see with fast parcel operators, they are requiring all this information up front, and there's no option to do it via self-declare. So it will be really interesting to see how this goes. And at the moment, I'm surmising based on that data set that I shared earlier on.
Okay, that's perfect. Thank you very much, Jonathan. Just one or two more questions, I think, and then before we conclude the webinar. So basically, we have a question here. Is there any monetary revenue limit for goods imported from third countries into Northern Ireland not at risk, where the final destination is GB? And then for items where EU duty was applicable, but still the goods are still going into GB, can the duty reimbursement scheme be used to waive this duty?
Okay, the first one is a really, really interesting one because we hit two forms of legislation on this.
Yep.
There, because there's so much legislation that is announced on Saturdays or in the evening or something like that. But I think around autumn time last year, I could pull it out. But on a Saturday morning, there was a legislation came out that goods moving from via Northern Ireland into GB must have a commercial or logistical reason for doing so. And that is to prevent circumvention. Okay.
Yeah.
So qualifying Northern Ireland goods are goods that, as we said, physically located in Northern Ireland at the point of sale, not under special customs procedure, or commercially processed manufactured within Northern Ireland. If you're moving goods into NI from rest of world that will ultimately go to GB, you must meet that criteria that there is a commercial or logistical reason for the goods moving on that basis. Now, I have been involved in several compliance reviews for companies over the last number of years, and I have dealt with very, very high value watches and jewellery. And we were able to provide a commercial reason for the movement of goods from rest of world directly into NI, and no monetary value was put on it. But bear in mind those two pieces of legislation: qualifying Northern Ireland goods, because there will be, and there is already, intelligence-based and random checks on vehicle movements from NI to GB, and you must be able to confirm that there is a commercial or logistical reason for the goods moving in from Northern Ireland. But I'm not aware of any monetary value cap being put on goods at the moment. It just is down to the reason it's moved this way. Second question, Marcus, can you remind me of that, please?
Yep. Well, basically, it was to do with just was there any way of waiving the duty through the duty reimbursement scheme in that scenario where you've got a
right.
sort of
So if you pay the duty up front, so what we have is a scenario where if you move goods into Northern Ireland, where the difference between the UK tariff and the EU tariff, the EU tariff is 3% or more higher than the EU tariff. The EU tariff will apply irrespective if they're at risk or not. But we have been told that you're able to use the waiver for the element between the UK and EU tariff up to 3%. I'm unaware of being able to use it above that in that initial element. I have, however, seen through compliance reviews in HMRC and specific cases, companies that have paid the EU duty on goods because it was higher than the UK duty, and they have been able to get via the duty reimbursement scheme that remissed to their duty waiver account and have that duty reimbursed to them, i.e. they paid the EU duty, have evidence available that those goods have remained within the internal UK market, and then used their have that payment that they made, physical payment made, put onto their de minimis allowance account with that 300,000 cap. The only thing I would add in there, Marcus, is we are going to be in a really, really strange scenario from the 1st of October. We already are, but more so from the 1st of October. We are going to have goods that are in free circulation in Northern Ireland that have been declared as at risk, and they are in free circulation in both the EU and the UK. We're going to have goods that are in free have been declared as not at risk moved from GB to NI that are in free circulation within the UK only, They cannot be moved to the EU. They cannot be sold to the EU. And we're going to have a case of goods that have moved from the rest of the world to NI that have been declared not at risk. And if I look back at the legislation, those goods in certain circumstances are in free circulation in Northern Ireland only. They're not in free circulation in Great Britain. So it will come down to the specific items, and it will come down to getting engagement and direct advice and support from HMRC, DBT, or whoever, in the government departments. Get in touch with them. Keep yourself right. Ensure that it's done. I don't think there'll be a monetary control on it. I do believe you can remove, get reimbursed duty that you paid and get it transferred to your waiver scheme. Or in that case, if you can provide evidence that the goods will remain within the United Kingdom, get it reimbursed.
Yeah. Okay, no, thank you very much, Jonathan. That's a really great advice. Just one more question, then I think we're going to have to wrap this up. Apologies if we didn't get through every single question. As I say, look, there's one-to-one support available. If you still remaining questions, please avail of that support, and we're more than happy to help you out. It's just this part of the question is just going back to the topic of parcels, and it's where a business has obviously sold an item to a customer in GB who now wants to return the item via parcel to Northern Ireland. Are there any customs requirements for returns going from GB to Northern Ireland?
Yeah, so the goods has been sent from Northern Ireland to GB and then been returned again. So you as is the case now on those, you can declare those goods as not at risk because it's products that were previously in free circulation within the EU. So in the case of a parcel, you would notify your parcel operator that they're not at risk, but you will still require UKIMS authorization to do that. And there shouldn't be any duty applied, and then the other charges in there. One of the things to bear in mind as well, duty reimbursement can be used for the reimbursement of tariffs applied on at-risk items, where you can provide evidence that those goods remain within the UK, or where you're asking for it to be waived instead of having the duty payable. You cannot use the duty reimbursement scheme for fees charged for use of a duty reimbursement or duty deferment account, or any fees associated with the customs agency clearance by the fast parcel operator. Those fees are for your account. You will be eligible or will have to applicable to pay for them. Somebody said about the URL. I seen just quickly for Northern Ireland tariffs. Google it. It's the Northern Ireland tariff schedule. It will bring you directly into it. It should be the head of it. Make sure it says at the very top of it Northern Ireland and Northern Ireland tariff schedule rather than United Kingdom. If it says United Kingdom, you'll see that there'll be a link that you can change it to the Northern Ireland one.
Yes, that's a very good point, Jonathan. We can certainly circulate that link around as well after the webinar. So I think we're just about out of time here. I want to just, first of all, thank you very much, Jonathan, for your presentation and your questions. Some really incredible information there that is very topical at the minute. I would like to obviously thank everyone who's attended today and submitted questions. And again, just re-emphasize that, look, we know this is quite a technical area. And if you're in need of further guidance, please get in touch with us. We may be able to get you one-to-one support with one of our Jonathan or another one of our consultants to help look specifically at your business and the scenarios you're facing to make sure that you're fully up to speed with all changes that need to be made both now and then after the 1st of October. And as well, don't forget this is only the first of a series of webinars. Next week, for anyone who's on this webinar, next week's webinar on preparing for a customs audit will be again a very topical webinar. So I advise you all to strongly consider, if you haven't done so already, applying for that one. But again, just want to again thank you all very much for attending, and thank you very much to Jonathan for his excellent presentation and his answering of the questions. And as I say, if any, we will circulate the slides and a copy of the recording along with relevant contact details after the webinar. If anyone has any questions about anything covered in this webinar today, please don't hesitate to get in touch. But apart from that, I'd just like to wish everyone a very wonderful afternoon, and hope to see you all on future webinars. Thank you.
Thanks, Marcus. Don't give up, guys. You'll get there in the end. Reach out, get the support you needed, and ask questions. There's absolutely no stupid questions. There's no experts out there. There's specialists. There's people like myself who get to deal with this every day, and still there's many gaps in what we know. So don't give up. Use the resources there. Get the support that you need, and we'll get there, and we'll make this work for us, hopefully, in the long run. Thank you, everybody. All the best, Marcus. Cheers.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Cheers. Bye-bye. Bye.